Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside. But what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
The MMA Outsiders is back once again. A little unnatural being on a Tuesday, but them's the breaks in the business, I guess. That's Sam Bando. I'm Tom Albano, as always. And Zan, we've had a historical weekend, a very big weekend, all being at our own different things. I went to a ball game. You went to Gamebred Boxing 4. We had WrestleMania, which I know is on the professional wrestling side of things, but pro wrestling is going to play, well, a very big role in today's show, let alone, Zan, a big role in the combat sports world over the next several years, or let's face it, just forever now, with the historical news that we got to talk about today. Plus, of course, we still have UFC 287 this week that we got to talk about, previewing that card that airs on Saturday. Before we get to anything, however, you make sure you hit that like button, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and follow us on social media at MMA Outsiders ETB, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Follow the network at ETB Network on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell, like I said before, to get notified of everything. MMA Outsiders, Empty the Bench, Game On, so much more. That's Sam Bando. He's a writer at bjpen.com. Find him on Twitter at Zambano99. I'm Tom Albano. You can find my work over at Fansided MMA, and you can follow me on Twitter at Thomas J. Albano. All right, Zan. Oh, and I want to actually throw out a couple more plugs. Don't forget to go to etbpodcast.com for to get more information on the Empty the Bench Network and blogs from our hosts and Empty the Bench Network. Of course, if you missed it from last week's Empty the Bench sports show, starting to bring all of our shows over onto the different audio platforms. So if you don't want to see Zan and I's faces anymore, that's fine. Soon enough, maybe even now, gotta double check. You could, listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your audio platforms. Zan, I think, are you going to say something?
Yeah, I gotta say, being a podcast guy myself, it'll be nice to hear myself and yourself in audio form. So now I can send it to all my friends who'd rather not want to click on a YouTube video; they'd rather want to just listen to the show.
For sure, and that's going to go for all the shows eventually. I think we're still in the process, or they're all up right now. I gotta double check, and Nick's got to fill me in. Again, I know this is a little different, us being on Tuesday once again. We used to be on Tuesday mornings. We had shifted over to Wednesdays for accommodating stuff, but let's say some behind-the-scenes happenings. The coverage of the NCAA championship game with Game On has forced us into a Tuesday morning slot here. So apologies to everyone out there who's a little thrown off. Hopefully next week we will be back in our normal Wednesday morning time slot. A little disappointing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's a little disappointing. And again, to reiterate Tom's point, we hope we'll be back on a regular schedule next week with what you guys are used to hearing and seeing from us. So we just wanted to get that out of the way when sports are busy, especially at a time with the NCAA men's basketball championship having taken place last night when this will go out. That means that sports are at a busy time of the year, and we just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. So it also kind of is disappointing, Zan, to talk about, because obviously we're going to talk about your experience at Gamebred Boxing. We'll talk about our boy in Bellator, Daniel James, pulling off the big win.
Absolutely.
Brendan Loughnane in the PFL, and honestly, the PFL off to, let's be honest, a pretty shitty start to its 2023 season.
Well said.
And then UFC 287, of course. And here's where it gets even more disappointing that we're on Tuesdays, and we're recording on Monday, airing on Tuesdays, because Zan, we're in the midst right now, like as we're recording this, and honestly, by the time it airs too, of probably the biggest story in combat sports, and I would say since the UFC was purchased by Endeavor, which is funny enough to say because Endeavor once again in the news. Endeavor, the parent company of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, is finalizing a deal to purchase the WWE, Zan, for over Vince McMahon's asking price of $9 billion. With the with
Yeah,
the B with the pinky finger of Austin Powers, $9 billion.
yeah, that's a hefty chunk of change considering that now combined when you combine both companies they'll be worth a whopping 21.4 billion. So that just goes to show how massive this deal is. And truly, I mean, you want to talk about some massive power and a lot of big egos. You're combining a lot of big egos into one deal, and it's going to be, if not just a media circus where they're going to both run separately, which according to several sources within the last little while here, that is going to be the case. But regardless, it's going to be big in terms of name value. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. So, as of the time we're recording, again, because again, it's we're in the midst of a little bit of a weird schedule here at the ATB network. This news is still breaking. So we're recording this on Monday morning, turning Monday afternoon here where I am in New York on the East Coast. Uh, and right now there has been a lot of information that is slowly starting to pour out over the next few days, over the next hours. And actually, Zan, sorry, I'm a little thrown off, but there is actually some boxing breaking news that we're gonna have to discuss right after this.
What is this?
Apparently, the WBA has officially ordered Oleksandr Usyk to defend his 3 heavyweight world titles against Daniel Dubois.
What? What? That's a fight that
So we're
nobody.
gonna.
That's a fight that nobody asked for.
So just when you think we can't get any crazier, we're gonna be interrupted live on our. We're gonna have to adjust on the fly here. So
Oh
this was
wow!
already
Oh
gonna be
wow!
going to
Oh wow!
let's stay with this. Let's stay with this because this is still the biggest sports news here. So, um, here are the basics that we have. So this is right now as of Monday morning, turning into Monday afternoon. So the deal is that the WWE has been purchased, as we said, by Endeavor, the parent company of the UFC, for $9 billion. Endeavor would have 51% control over. Actually, let me just read the CNBC article. This comes from Alex Sherman. This broke over WrestleMania, like in the midst, right before day 2 of WrestleMania started. Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Entertainment is in advanced talks to be sold to Ari Emanuel's Endeavor Group, the parent company of UFC, according to people familiar with the matter. A deal could be announced as soon as Monday. UFC and WWE are expected to form a new publicly traded company as part of the agreement. Endeavor is slated to own 51% of the new combat sports entertainment company, while WWE shareholders would get 49%. The Endeavor deal gives WWE an enterprise value of $9.3 billion. And Ari Emanuel is expected to act as chief executive of both Endeavor and the new company. McMahon, likewise, is expected to be the executive chairman, while Endeavor president Mark Shapiro will also work in the same role as the new company. Dana White will remain as president of the UFC, while WWE CEO Nick Khan will serve as president of the wrestling business. And actually, John Pollock, who I believe was John Pollock, who was a wrestling journalist in the wrestling journalism world, reporting that Paul Levesque, aka Triple H, will remain as the creative content officer for the WWE. trying to now flip over to back to Twitter because there have been several statements posted about this deal at this time. One from
Do
Endeavor
you,
themselves.
after you read the Endeavor one, do you mind if I read Dana White's personal statement on this? Because I have it up here.
Yeah, I'll read Endeavor. You can read Dana, and I'll read Vince McMahon.
Okay.
This is from Ari Emanuel, the head of Endeavor, the company that now owns both the WWE and UFC. Quote, "This is a rare opportunity to create a global live sports entertainment per play built for where the industry is headed. For decades, Vince and his team have demonstrated an incredible track record of innovation and shareholder value creation. That Endeavor can deliver significant additional value for shareholders by bringing UFC and WWE together." Zan, the official statement from UFC President Dana White states,
Absolutely. So Dana White stated, as of a couple of hours ago at the time of this recording, it says, "quote This company has been on fire for the last 7 years, and now that we will be adding WWE to the portfolio, I'm excited to take this to another level. Vince is a savage in the wrestling space. Artie is a beast at what he does, and then add what we at the UFC bring to the table, and there's no limit to what this company can accomplish in the next few years." It is from UFC President Dana White on the Endeavor breaking news with this new partnership with the WWE, as they're now under the same umbrella.
I mean, it is kind of absolutely insane to really think about, Zan, that WWE and the U. Okay, uh, and a statement from Vince McMahon, very brief. Together, we will be a 21 plus $billion live sports and entertainment powerhouse with a collective fan base of more than 1 billion people and an exciting growth opportunity. Uh, I gotta say, Zan, this is not something. I mean, I can't say it's not something I didn't see coming. I just didn't think that it was going to be Endeavor. So we're going to try to focus more on the MMA side of things because this is an MMA show.
Yep.
Probably what will happen is Nick Morgeson and I will have more to talk about this later this week on Thursday on Empty the Bench, where we'll hopefully have more official finalized details about this new, I don't mean to wordplay, but endeavor that the UFC and WWE are going to be barking
That's
on.
that's literally what it is. An Endeavor with Endeavor. That's literally what they're doing.
I just The reason I brought that up was because Vince, for those who may not be aware of the inner workings with the WWE and everything or had missed it, Vince, if you remember, retired back in July, 1 month after the Wall Street Journal broke several reports of Vince McMahon allegedly paying off several women that he had affairs with. It was hush money, essentially, and there was questions about if he had used company funds or not. Vince McMahon retired in July, making Nick Khan the new CEO of WWE, along with Stephanie McMahon, his daughter, and Paul Triple H Levesque uh, became the head of creative. Then, around late December, early January, Vince McMahon pulled a power play, essentially, as because remember he still was the majority shareholder. He still had final voting power. And the reports were basically that Vince McMahon had told the board of directors, "I will reject any sale, something like this, or sale, merger, whatever, unless I'm back in charge." So Vince McMahon came back into play in January. His board of directors reportedly or supposedly was not going to be involved in the creative side of things. Again, that creative, that's dipping into WWE territory, so we're not going to focus on that. But I think it's just a little mind blowing, Zan. Speaking as a WWE person, it's a good thing I wore a Tap Out shirt today because Tap Out has been in bed with both WWE and UFC in the past. Um, I guess it just blows my mind, Zan, that Vince McMahon, and I did this back when he had retired in July. Vince McMahon was the kind of person who his last day working for the WWE, I always had thought, was going to be the day that he was last on this earth. I thought he was going to die as CEO of WWE. But here we are. He's back in the fray. Not only is he back in the fray, but the UFC and WWE, like this blows my mind. The two combat spots. So I started as a WWE fan, went over to the UFC because the Ultimate Fighter was always airing at immediately after Monday Night Raw in Raw's last
Mm-hmm.
year on Spike. And now those two worlds are literally clashing. We've had, Brock Lesnar in the UFC. We've had Ronda Rousey go over to WWE. Daniel Cormier made an appearance at Extreme Rules. He was in the refereed the main event of Extreme Rules back in October. But these two worlds, Zan, are now literally one.
Yeah, 18 years after Monday Night Raw would air on the same night as the Ultimate Fighter, they're now in business together. That's pretty crazy.
You know what's funny? There's this story that in the early 2000s, Shane McMahon tried to purchase the UFC, and Vince basically said, "No, we're not going to do that."
There's also the story of how the WWE tried to pay Mike Goldberg not to call a UFC event and to go to the WWE instead,
Because
according to Chael Sonnen.
he was offered a little extra to no show the UFC because that night was the WWE had just left Spike to go back to the USA Network, and the UFC was doing a fight night card on October 3rd. So it was a head-to-head kind of thing.
Yeah, that was Chael Sonnen who said that.
That was right. That was Chael.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, I'm just going through, looking through all the different stories. Like I said, we're recording this on Monday, so everything at this point is still coming through. Uh, again, I'm
You
seeing
want
a
to
lot of
you want to talk about Vince McMahon, his last day on Earth. Him, being part of the WWE and his last day on Earth. That's what I'm starting to feel about Dana, where I feel like he'll never want to leave and he'll want to stay UFC president for as long as he can. Although he has hinted at the word retirement a couple of times, but with his passion still for it, I don't see how he retires anytime soon.
yeah. No, I don't see either of those guys retiring anytime soon. And now, Zan, the fact that they're both together, a part of the same company. And it's funny, you talk about Dana's statement about how everybody, Ari, Vince, and Dana, they're all perfect for one another. They're all brash. They're all loud. They both all, don't take no for an answer, won't take shit from anybody. Like,
I
it
think Dana
seems
ha- I
perfect.
think I think Dana has the biggest public persona of the three, though. Like public, he's speaking
Over
in.
Vince? Really?
I actually do. Now, granted, this could be my arrogance that I don't follow the WWE as much as you do, but I just feel like I see Dana White a lot more in the news than Vince McMahon.
I think part of that might have to deal with the fact that Vince, even before the sexual misconduct allegations, hush money allegations came last year, Vince was starting to try and get out of the limelight because I don't know, ever since he's just gotten older, he's been trying to like stay out of things, with the exception of a rare few times where he's needed in storyline. Uh I think the questions right now, and it's funny, Zan, because it's the biggest combat story, but I don't think much of this is really going to affect the UFC. I think at this point, like we're talking all about this, and it is, and don't get me wrong, it is still the biggest combat sports story, and we needed to lead off of it this week. But I think it's just going to be same as it ever was with the UFC. I think, Zan, for the UFC, this is just a plus. You know what? You know why? Because this just means more money to play with.
Yeah, I can't disagree.
I think the questions right now are just a matter of, they're more on the WWE end when it comes to creative, when it comes to the business end of how things are going to be done. If anything will change, business wise under the new company. Which, by the way, there's no new name right now announced for the new company. Although on the stock market, Endeavor and Ari Emanuel have reserved the acronym TKO. So we might know the name of the publicly traded company, the new company that Ari is going to be heading with Vince and all of them. We might know that by the time Nick Morrison and I are airing on Thursday on Empty the Bench. As of right
More
now, we don't
than
have that.
more than likely, you guys will.
Yeah.
I think so.
But right now, it's right now all we have is TKO. So, I think the big question right now, Zan, and I have to. I'm scrambling on Twitter right now, trying to find the name of the girl who, of the woman who uh, reported it. The question is going to be what's going on with the TV deals, because the television deals for the WWE are being negotiated this year. Technically the contract with NBC for Monday Night Raw and Fox for Friday Night SmackDown expire in October 2024. WWE like to do their TV rights stuff a year in advance, so this is going to basically be worth watching now that they're going to be under some new ownerships, as well, Zan, as the idea that the UFC's deal with ESPN and the WWE's deal with Peacock, because the WWE had formed the WWE Network in 2014, but obviously that became part of Peacock within 2021. I wonder if any of that is affected by this. Like when 2020, end of 2025 or start of 2026 comes around, does the UFC stay with ESPN? Does WWE stay with Peacock, or what happens from here?
Well said. By the way, Sarah Fisher was the one who
Thank
broke
you.
the potential story about the combined streaming deals for both the UFC and the WWE.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's the thing I wanted to talk about. So, WWE and UFC, now that I actually see Sarah's account, WWE and UFC will pursue separate media rights negotiations for linear TV, which again the WWE is doing later this year, especially now that they have the new ownership that they had supposedly been looking for the past few months. But there could be an opportunity to pursue a combined streaming deal. WWE President Nick Khan told Sarah Fisher in an interview on Axios. So as of right now, the UFC and WWE will operate as separate entities. Again, separate entities for now. The thing that's going to be interesting is going to be what happens, because now, Zan, I expect that although we're going to be talking about them being one company, et cetera, over the next year, I guarantee you, I think the governments, the SEC and company, I mean, the SEC and others will probably be looking at this deal, and it's probably not going to be finalized for a little while. But once those two companies, the WWE and UFC, are merged, I wonder if again, like you mentioned and the story mentions, they're gonna have their own streaming service or not. Other nuggets that, by the way, Sarah Fisher reported in her story with Axios, layoff and staff changes are possible within the next week or two. Uh, Despite the fact that Endeavor has severed ties with Saudi Arabia, the WWE will continue its relationship with it. I mean, because the only Middle East trip that we ever see with the UFCs, and obviously is Abu Dhabi with Fight Island, but UFC, as far as we know, don't deal with the Saudis. Endeavor severed those ties with the Saudis whiles ago. However, with the WWE, those ties will continue. The companies again will be run separately. The name of the combined entity is being finalized within the next couple of days. So, as you mentioned, more than likely by the time Nick Morrison and I get together, we'll know the official name. Um, so I could definitely see as of this year, the WWE continues to negotiate for its linear TV deals with your Monday Night Raw and your Friday Night SmackDown. on its own. I wonder, however, if any of that is going to be affected by the future, where, as we mentioned, the ESPN deal with the UFC and the Peacock deal with the WWE run out near each other, if not around the same time.
So to clarify that, the ESPN Plus deal for the UFC expires in 2025, whereas Peacock expires in 26.
In 2026. So there's a year apart from one another. So again, I wonder still, Zan, if any move is going to happen on the over the top. For those who don't know the term over the top, I mean the streaming platforms or the linear TV, depending on, this new deal. Like, in other words, what I'm asking about that, Zan, is that later this year, when WWE is trying to finalize its linear TV packages, is ESPN now going to be in the mix?
For the WWE, maybe, but I'm gonna make a prediction right now. 2 years removed from the deal expiring, that I think that the UFC will re-sign with ESPN in 25. I think
I
they'll stay.
I think, Zan, ESPN is kind of perfect on there with the worldwide leader in sports. They get to be on a streaming platform plus charge for pay-per-views. They don't have to reveal their numbers if they don't want to. And I could even argue, Zan, that the money that they get with ESPN kind of nullifies their needs to know the pay-per-views totals. I mean, the pay-per-view numbers, sadly enough for us. I think it's too perfect.
And
they're
the
not gonna.
and the bigger prelims are on ABC. What can get better than that, right?
Exactly. So, no, I agree with you 100%. Zan, like I told you before we started recording, I see it way more likely that the WWE jumps over to ESPN Plus than Dana White and the UFC move from ESPN Plus to Peacock. They're going to see Peacock and NBC as a step down. Cool. Even though to us before we started recording that when UFC was trying to find a new home after Spike TV and trying to get to network television, they had at one point discussed deals with NBC, which eventually Zan would pick up the World Series of Fighting, which we now know today as PFL.
Right. And I was gonna say, I mean, could Peacock really take all of that on, considering the massive Big Ten football and basketball media rights deal that's coming up within the next year or so? That might be too much for Peacock to take on. So don't be surprised if the UFC stays with ESPN, because of that.
Yeah. So I could see one of
Or
two things happening.
or who knows? Maybe you see Fox get back into the mix and do a joint with ESPN and do what they were going to do initially, which was Fox carries half of the event schedule and ESPN does the other half. You never know.
And I guess WWE would be in that mix too, because I mean, technically, there's a partial deal right that now with the WWE, considering Raw airs on USA Network, which is an NBC property, and Fox gets Friday Night SmackDown and a bunch of other programming. Zan, for a while during the pandemic, a lot of FS1 and FS2's programming was WWE. Like their overnight stuff was WWE stuff. I don't know if it's still that way right now. I haven't watched FS1 or FS2 in a while.
Well
Uh,
said. That
I the question right now, Zan, at this point is, or going back to not question, but going back to what I was saying before. One of two things could be happening, considering what we just said that UFC isn't going to go to Peacock anytime. One, does WWE join UFC over on ESPN Plus after 2026?
that seems
Two,
logical.
that it seems logical, and two, the does the alternate thing, like Sarah mentioned, the UFC and WWE both tell the prospective people buzz off, and they form their own company. I mean, their own streaming service. I mean, WWE technically has the experience with that, Zan. We've talked about before how WWE was kind of an innovator with that WWE network, where the fans get the video library, the premium live events, and exclusives all for just $9.99 a month. That obviously has stayed going over to Peacock, although we do have the different tiers now because it's $4.99, but you get ads. It's $9.99 if you don't want the ads. And I mean, it's definitely a step up, Zan, the WWE network stuff over what happens with UFC, whether it was UFC Fight Pass or ESPN Plus now, because you get the video library, but you still have to pay for the pay-per-views. And I worry, Zan, for the sake of wrestling fans, if WWE is basically going to go into that model where they will have to start charging $69.99 basically for pay-per-views. And that's the concern, Zan, for anybody who's not just a wrestling fan, but a fight fan, Zan. We've talked about before in the past about a combat sports fan. If they have ESPN Plus and they gotta purchase the ESPN pay-per-views. Plus, if they're gonna purchase any boxing ESPN pay-per-views with Top Rank and such, DAZN and the monthly subscription plus any pay-per-views on their end. Any pay-per-views on the normal linear pay-per-view format for say
Showtime.
anything. Yeah, Showtime and Premier Boxing Champions and All Elite Wrestling or All Elite Wrestling with the Bleacher. It's already expensive enough to be a combat sports fan. That, having WWE go over to ESPN or them forming their own company and basically WWE saying, yeah, well, what we just had for the last decade or so where you got the events for, your normal monthly subscription. Yeah, that's not going to happen anymore. That's going to really hurt.
Yeah, I think so too. And I was also going to say this is kind of off topic, but it's somewhat on topic. As you and I both know, as we talked about on this show, the newest season of The Ultimate Fighter with Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler, for the first time in the history of the show, is going to be airing on linear ESPN. Do you think this deal in any way, shape, or form affects the UFC's linear content base, or am I thinking way too far ahead on that?
Maybe a little too far ahead. The point I was going to make, Zan, was this could be an opportunity with how much money that they've got for the UFC to offer maybe a little cut to its subscribers, where it's like if you're subscribed to ESPN Plus already, for instance, you get a fraction of the cost at least. I don't see it ever being like WWE Network or Peacock where you get it for your monthly subscription, but hey, we'll cut the price in half or so already an ESPN Plus subscriber. But I highly doubt somebody like Dana White and Ari Emanuel are going to go for that.
Well said. Before we wrap up, are there any final thoughts that you have on this historic announcement from what we currently know at the moment?
No, and like I said, it's historical. You're right on that. I have no other thoughts at this point. There's still more that we gotta find out. And like I said, a lot of this is gonna concern the WWE end, which Nick Morrison and I are gonna have to talk about at a later time. Um, just like I said, I didn't think, Zan, in my wildest dreams, that the WWE and UFC would be under the same umbrella. But
Neither did I.
Here we are.
Absolutely. Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with those two companies over the next several months. But let's talk about now some fights that actually happened. So, over the weekend, I was in attendance covering Gamebred Boxing 4 for BJPenn.com. It was my third combat sports event as credentialed media, and I have to say it was a spectacle of sorts, just kind of as I predicted. Anthony Pettis knocking off Roy Jones Jr. in a split decision upset in his hometown. I didn't score the fight for Anthony Pettis. I thought that Roy Jones Jr. did enough to win it 5-3. Overall, it was a decent fight. There just wasn't a ton of power shots thrown. Either guy was hurt all that badly, but it was definitely an experience, and it was a fight that I think the pro Pettis crowd was pleased with. But yeah, overall, Pettis got the win. And Ray Jones Jr. is now going to have to go back to the drawing board to see if he really wants to keep doing this. I mean, it looks like they said it in the ring that Pettis and Roy Jones want to do it again because they thought it was a close fight. But overall, I thought it was what people were expecting. I guess it wasn't the greatest fight I've ever seen, nor was it the worst fight. But Pettis winning definitely made the crowd happy, and I think with him just winning, no matter how he won, I think people got what they paid for. Just with the main event.
Cool. I mean, Roy Jones Jr. I know he and Tyson had that fight that was kind of fun in November of 2020. I know that this fight, like you said, kind of impressed, kind of entertained some people. Definitely entertained the hometown crowd for Pettis, so they might want to do it again. I mean, I don't know, Zan. Like I would think Roy Jones Jr. at this point would be doing boxing exhibitions and not,
No, I
something
agree.
like.
No, I agree. But hey, the way he moves at 54, in my opinion, and being just only a couple feet away, I was pretty impressed.
I mean, he
I
moves better. Zan, he moves better for 54 than some people move at 30, 35.
It's pretty insane. But yeah, I mean, I gotta admit, just from my personal experience and being there ringside, like as Roy Jones was coming out and as his crew of people were standing up to cheer for him, it was a surreal entrance, and so was Anthony Pettis walking out to his usual song. It's showtime, and the crowd like lost their mind when he came out. It was a really cool scene. But the funny thing was a bunch of people were filing in just before the main event because, as you and I both know, with these boxing cards, usually when you look at the card and you don't know much about the other fighters, you usually wait until the main event. Well, that's what several of the crowd did. They kind of waited around a little bit. But I mean, just being there live in that atmosphere was kind of cool because it was definitely a pro Pettis crowd, and it was a fight that I think people were excited about, and I think people couldn't wait for the main event just because the main card kind of dragged on a little bit. It started later than I thought it was going to. But yeah, it was a decent main event. Would I go and see these two fight again? The answer is no. So, but
Fair
yeah,
enough.
Anthony Pettis winning in his hometown was a pretty cool scene, though. That's for sure.
Then you had Vitor Belfort defeating Jacare Souza. Uh, I don't know if I could. What do you think? I think we predicted both predicted Belfort was gonna win.
Yeah, we both predicted Belfort was going to win, and what disappointed me about this fight was or not Bellator. Belfort had several chances to finish. I'm sorry. I
I'm
had that
surprised the fight wasn't promoted by Bellator.
yeah, you would think this is a perfect Bellator Legends fight. Is it not? You bring in two former UFC fighters and you put them in Bellator. It's a great business plan. Anyway, I was disappointed in this fight simply because Vitor Belfort had several chances to finish Jacare Souza and he just simply didn't. I was very confused. I'm like, wait, you're just gonna let him sit back and eat that? You're not gonna finish him? So it was very interesting. But they were both very respectful afterward. They gave each other a ton of props, called each other legends. It was a pretty cool scene. I just think the fight was a little underwhelming just because both of those guys are pretty old. But hey, Belfort hanging in there though, as primarily a boxer, his hand speed is still very much like a holy shit type of hand speed. Even with how old he is, I had never seen him fight in person before, so I was just in awe with how fast his hand speed was. It was pretty cool.
And then, of course, Jose Aldo went to a draw with Jeremy Stevens. But I don't think the biggest story is with the fight, but it's with that once again, San Conor McGregor cannot let things go. Conor McGregor has to jump into the picture.
Yeah, McGregor overtook the entire story of the whole event. Of course, by tweeting that he and Aldo should box, and then Jose Aldo, in so many words, told him to go screw himself. So there's that. The McGregor Aldo rivalry is alive and well to some degree. Will they ever box? Probably not. Would it do absolutely huge numbers? Absolutely. Would I do all I could to be there? Absolutely. But But yeah, I will say though, Aldo and Stevens, this actually was a phenomenal fight. They just went at it for, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was an 8 round fight from what I recall, and they just went at it, and it was awesome. It was the fight that I expected it to be, and it was without a doubt the best fight on the whole card.
Zan,
Uh,
what do you think about Connor versus who the fuck is that guy, Jeremy Stevens, though, in a boxing match?
That would be, I think, the build up for that fight would be better than the fight itself, which just put it that
I
way. That
second that.
that UFC 205 clip would just play on loop over and 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 over again. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
Hey man,
Uh,
Jeremy Stevens versus Conor McGregor in Iowa sounds very appealing though. In Jeremy Stevens' hometown, that would be insane.
fair enough. All right, Zan, before we get into the rest of the weekend recaps in our UFC 287 preview, obviously we talked about it briefly before because I said we had to cover it. The breaking news: the WBA has ordered Oleksandr Usyk to defend his WBA, IBF, and WBO heavyweight championships against Daniel Dubois.
Yeah, I just think Usyk is gonna run from him the whole fight and win a boring decision. What do you think?
You want to know what I think? You really want to know what I think?
What do
Hang
you
on one
think?
second. I'm gonna take some music from Anti the Bench to really showcase San what I think about this. There, that's what I think about this. Once again, boxing has gotten in its own way.
Yeah, or as Dana White's infamous line is, "Welcome to boxing."
I told San. Well, we said people were crazy if they thought that Usyk versus Fury was going to get done with 6 to 8 weeks before the fight.
And of course it didn't.
What were you all expecting? And what were you all and I knew it. Who else was going to get in the way? The WBA. They love to mess things up, Zan.
And then watch how Daniel Dubois is going to somehow upset Usyk and create this firestorm because that's exactly what boxing wants.
Of course, let's not focus on the fact that, like we mentioned last week, that Devin Haney and Vasyl Lomachenko are going to battle because, that's actually, Zan, a rare occasion where in boxing, two of the greatest of the planet are actually going to fight. No, we need Usyk versus Dubois. Yay!
Yeah. Speaking of Loma versus Haney, those tickets are going by really fast. So if you're considering going to that event, I would jump on that this week because they're going to be sold out in Vegas before you know it. But anyway, that's beside the point. This fight is a travesty for the heavyweight division, and if Usyk doesn't win, I think a lot of people are going to be very disappointed because then it ruins the biggest fight ever, which is Usyk versus Fury. But now Anthony Joshua wants to fight Tyson Fury now. Now that this is actually going to happen. And of course, Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua is 4 years too late.
Zan, let's just get Conor McGregor in the mix. Let's let Conor beef up about 40, 50, 60 pounds, and let's get him in here too. Why the hell not? What more do we have to lose?
Oh, trust me, if Conor McGregor got into boxing, I would literally pay for every single one of those. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, of course.
He's gonna become the belt collector again. Give me your belt.
Yeah. Even if he doesn't actually fight for it, he'll just want it.
What were you gonna say before?
Oh, I was just gonna say, do you have a prediction as to where this fight will take place, in your opinion?
It'd have to be England, right?
You would think. Would it be England this summer or in early fall, do you think?
Probably that in-between period where it's like the end of August or early September.
Okay, well, that makes the fight even more boring to look forward to, but okay.
You're saying that like you're expecting good things from this.
No, I know, because as you know, I'm very positive. So I always hope I always hope every fight is awesome, but I just feel like this fight will not be that.
I understand, Zain, and I normally would like to agree, but again. All right,
Tom,
I'm turning that music off.
Tom, how disappointed will you be if somehow, some way, Garcia versus Tank Davis gets canceled?
Again, I will throw this up. Again, Usyk just continues to do this to himself.
Well,
right.
well said.
Let's just talk about some more positive things. Daniel James, once again, Zain, his second Bellator fight after, like, this wasn't his second Bellator fight. He had competed in Bellator like a fight or two back in like 2014 or something like that. He comes back to the promotion. He pulls off a comeback knockout of Tyrell Fortune. Now he does it again against Marcelo Golm. So Marcelo Golm basically, Zain, if you want my recap of how I interpret things, he basically controlled James, kept him, in the clinch, kept him away with his power. The third round came around, and you could actually hear in between the second and third rounds, Daniel James's corner basically saying, "Let it go, let your fist fly." And well, in that third round, his fist definitely flied.
For sure. And I think the one mistake Marcelo Golm made was not getting it back to the ground in round 3 and deciding, oh, let's stand up with him and see if I can actually test myself. And of course, he got caught. But that was his biggest mistake, without a doubt. And by the way, just a little pat on the back from our show. Oh, I was just gonna say, by the way, just a little pat on the back for our show. We are undefeated when it comes to having exclusive interviews. I'm on this program. Usually, when we have a fighter on, they usually end up winning their next fight. So far, we're undefeated.
No, well, you are. I'm not. I had Danny Sapatello.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'm undefeated. You're not undefeated.
Zain, this is like me at Fansided back in 2019. It took me, remember, like 6-7 fighters for a win to happen.
Yeah. You
I am
went
like
you went like 1 for 6.
I am like the freaking curse. If you have an interview with me, you're done.
Well, let's see if I can keep my. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say, although I think that kind of changed during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I was actually on fire.
Oh yeah, that's true. Well, let's hope it continues when Zain fights at the end of April. We'll see. But nonetheless, though, very impressive win for Daniel James. He revealed at the post-fight press conference, which made my heart a little happy, that he is in talks to fight on the coveted Bellator 297 Chicago card, which got way more stacked after a recording a week ago. There's now 3 huge fights on that card, as Corey Anderson and Phil Davis will be fighting on Bellator 297 as well. Tom, could you imagine if they added Daniel James to Bellator 297? And if they did, is Bellator 297 one of the biggest cards they've ever done?
I mean, I thought Bellator 297 was already going to be a very big card. Adding Daniel James is just gonna help. And Zain, I'll be very honest. If Daniel James wins at Bellator 297, they would be foolish not to give him the winner of Ryan Bader versus Linton Vassell.
They have to. They have to.
They would have to give Daniel James the winner of Bader Vassell too. They have to.
And do you think if that fight happens, James versus is the winner. They would have to probably do that in Chicago too, right?
I would hope so. I would hope so
Mhm.
because Daniel James, this is one of those situations where, I mean, Zan, I think to Anthony Smith, end of the 2010s, where Anthony Smith was a veteran, went on a massive run in the UFC, and ultimately got a title shot, in 2019. I feel like you got to do the same thing with Daniel James, and it would be incredible, Zan, like you mentioned, if he got that title shot in Chicago.
For sure. And one thing I didn't touch on was in my interview with him, I didn't use the word, but I said, "Would you like to finish your career in Bellator?" And he said, "If they want me to, absolutely." So you might end up seeing if Daniel James wins the heavyweight title, you could see him conclude his MMA career as a Bellator fighter. And I don't know if Bellator has a Hall of Fame or not, but he's definitely going on a Bellator type of Hall of Fame run if he keeps winning in the fashion that he is. And I understand it's only been 2 fights since his first fight 8 years ago, but the way that he's re-energized the heavyweight division is very interesting. They're calling him the Bellator version of Derek Lewis, which is actually a comparison. And in fact, he might have harder punching power than Derek Lewis ever had, which is the funny part.
Yeah, actually, that might be a better comparison. But yeah, you gotta Bellator's got to keep with the Daniel James momentum. It's absolutely insane. And like I mentioned, if he has the quick turnaround and fights in Chicago in June, and ends up pulling the win there, then you got to give Daniel James a title shot sooner or later,
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine if they make a title fight at Bellator 300? How massive that would be!
for sure. All right. Also, the PFL opened its season. Brendan Loughnane stopped Marlon Moraes with some pretty vicious leg kicks. So Marlon Moraes has now lost 7 of his last 8, I think it is. And Zan, you didn't use the word with Daniel James in your review. I'm going to use the word with Marlon Moraes. I think it's time for him to retire.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think I mean, credit where credit is due. Brendan Loughnane looked absolutely incredible. I know, Zan, to borrow from a tweet that had tweeted out the highlight clip, I forget who had posted it, that it seems like when you become a champion in MMA, your stats, go up about 30%. And well, Brandon Loughnane looked incredible against Marlon Moraes. I think he definitely is an early favorite to repeat as the PFL featherweight champion, PFL bantamweight champion. Uh, but yeah, featherweight champion. But yeah, Marlon Moraes it has not been a he has not looked the same ever since Henry Cejudo beat him in 2019.
No, and that was the fight that I was at, and a fight that you could argue that Marlon Moraes was doing very well until he was finished.
I a fight that, man, all Marlon Moraes needed to do was win one more round and have the fight go to the buzzer, and he probably would have become the UFC bantamweight champion.
Yeah. By the way, the energy in Chicago shifted that night from all Marlon Moraes fans going crazy to a sense of just shock and silence in the United Center when Cejudo won that fight. And it's a scene that I'll always remembers. Well, I had to throw that in because it's a scene that's ingrained in my memory. The one and only time I've ever seen Moraes in person was his last really important fight of his career, which is pretty crazy to think about.
Hmm. Also, Rob Wilkinson defeated Thiago Santos, and Thiago Santos's PFL debut. So not a good run for the debuting UFC fighters. And I mean, Sam, I just briefly had a look at the PFL. Saw a lot of people complaining about the pacing. So not a good start to the season.
Yeah, not a good start. And isn't pacing something that PFL has had issues with for several years now? So this
Yep.
is this is this is nothing new.
Yeah. Yeah, this PFL isn't getting away from its demons anytime soon. I think it's kind of worse than when, like, we don't know what the hell is next for Kayla Harrison. They've been trying to
No,
talk about, pay-per-views and everything, but we haven't heard anything about that. We just came off the international series. I mean, the Challenger series. We're looking at some international cards, but we don't know what the next step is.
Yeah, we really don't, and it's interesting because they teased the super fight pay-per-view division, and nothing has happened with it. Yeah,
And I'd say, and it gets worse than when, we had this teasing earlier this year about PFL potentially being a favorite to land Francis Ngannou, and here we are 3 months later, and still nothing.
yeah. Although Dan Hardy says that it's only a matter of time before Francis Ngannou signs with the PFL, so who knows? With
I
that,
like Dan, I like Dan, but I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when the announcement comes out.
same here, same here. Well said. But yeah, that was a recap of the first PFL regular season card, and now we're gonna get into the big meal, if you will. Those are all the appetizers, and now we're gonna lead to probably the biggest UFC event of the year so far. First trip to Miami since 2003, UFC 287, and it is a banger. It is Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya, number two, um, number two, literally in UFC terms, number four all time between the two for the UFC middleweight championship. This is a fight that you and I have been buzzing about since the moment it was announced in Dana White's announcement of quarter one. Tom, this is going to be a great fight, and truly, I have no idea how it's going to go, but I just don't see a lot of Adesanya loses back to back, especially in the fashion that he did in his first fight, given the fact that he was winning the entire fight until he was finished in the fourth round. So I just want to know, does this fight go any similarly to the first one? And do you agree with me that this is a must win for Israel Adesanya? He has to win this fight, right?
Zan, should I replay the clip from November where you called me
You
crazy?
you called it. You called it. You not only did you say that Pereira was going to beat Adesanya, but you said that Pereira was going to finish Adesanya, and he did.
It took till the fifth round. I got scared, but it happened. Um,
Oh, true.
in
It
all
was the fifth round. He was winning. He was winning the entire fight until the last 3 minutes.
man, and I called it crazy because I said 2.5 months. We've had 2.5 months, and we had Leon knocking out Kamaru in the fifth round, and we had Pereira knocking out Asanya out in the fifth round. But both the champions were winning the fight heading into that round. This sport.
Well, if Pereira wins, the trend will continue of the champions keeping their belts and their rematches so far this year. If you think about it,
Yeah. But I was just gonna make the comparison. So that's the thing, Zan. I had actually mentioned last month that I thought uh, Kamaru versus Leon 3 was going to play out in the same way Kamaru Leon 2 played out. And with the exception being that Kamaru was going to hoist up the championship in a pretty clear unanimous decision. I was proven wrong there. Uh, and I've got a feeling that this fight is going to end up being a little different. I don't think it's going to go. See, now I gotta stop. I'm like, I don't think this fight's gonna go 5 rounds. But you know what? Pereira, we have seen him actually go the distance before, and that Pereira Adesanya one fight at the Garden actually almost did go the full distance. I don't know. Maybe this one actually
well,
does go the distance.
well, I will say this: I think over 3.5 rounds is the best bet for this fight. That's what I think.
Hmm. You know what? Here's what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna agree with you on the best bet. I'm gonna go for over 3.5 rounds. I think this one will go the distance. I think Pereira gets the win, however, and Pereira proves that he is for real in the middleweight division.
So that leads me to my next question: if Pereira wins, what do you do if you're Adesanya, having lost back-to-back fights to the champ now? What do you
Which
do?
which I should answer your question, by the way, which is yes, I think this is a bit of a must win. I mean, or at the very least, San, you if you're Israel Adesanya, at the very least, you have to do well in this fight. Like Kamaru Usman looked disappointing against Leon Edwards. his performance is something that Israel cannot afford to have in this fight at all. But if you're Adesanya, I mean, that's the tough part because you're gonna kill me on this one, Zan. But I'm looking at the rankings right now. Here's if Pereira beats Adesanya, I think you got to do Pereira versus Whitaker.
I think so too. That's the next logical fight.
If you're Adesanya, though, I don't want to see Adesanya Vettori again. I don't want to see Adesanya Cannonier again. I really don't want to see Adesanya versus Paulo Costa again.
No, absolutely not. Although Paulo Costa is getting the bag according to him. So
say those words again. According to him.
Yeah.
Adesanya versus Sean Strickland? I don't
know. No, because Sean Strickland's either going to out wrestle him or Adesanya is going to finish him quickly. That's what I think. And Strickland,
which means
no offense to Sean Strickland, but he is not the most entertaining fighter anybody's ever seen by any means. And he was viciously knocked out by Pereira. He was viciously knocked out by Pereira. So what else do you expect?
Well, Sand, then you're gonna kill me on this one. Do you hear it? Do you hear it in the distance? It's my hype train coming in. If Adesanya loses, I think you do Adesanya versus Strickland.
Oh no! Oh no!
What else can you do? There's no other fights left.
Okay, wait, but if Adesanya wins against Pereira, do you do Pereira versus Adesanya for the third straight time?
You might have to. San, do you not see Dana White being the kind of person that would run Adesanya Pereira into the ground?
Of course he would. Just like he did Moreno versus Figueiredo, of course he would. Although Moreno versus Figueiredo were different circumstances, but still, you know what I mean.
Sam, we talked about WWE before. I hear the fans chant already, "Fight forever, fight forever." But again, this is a must win for Adesanya, and I hate saying the DDP one because, of course, I say the DDP one because it sounds obvious coming from me. But I mean, again, you look at those other fights, nothing works with Adesanya.
No, and there's no way he's moving up in weight because he tried that and that failed. So he wouldn't do that again.
Would he? I'm throwing a crazy thought. Would he move down in weight? Go to welterweight?
Oh, this is where we're getting interesting. Okay. Hey, Israel Adesanya versus Colby Covington sounds very fun.
I mean, it's better than anything else he's got at middleweight, except for Dricus Duplessis or Roman Disease.
But you would be absolutely ecstatic if DDP beat him. You would be so excited.
Oh, I would be going nuts.
But in reality, though, I do see Adesanya winning the fight and getting his belt back. So I don't agree. I don't agree with you there.
I understand your perspective, but I think we both agree that this is must win for Adesanya.
Absolutely, 100%. If this fight is anything as entertaining as the last one, it's going to be a really, really, really good fight.
Sure. Speaking of the welterweight scene, Zan, co-main event Gilbert Burns versus George Masvidal. Let's be honest, Masvidal is not the draw that he was before. Masvidal is pretty much damaged goods. We have talked about a certain fight. You know, we teased a certain fight potentially being made if a certain someone else loses. Although, Zan, very interesting comment that Masvidal made during the UFC countdown video. He did. He did. Said if he loses to Gilbert Burns, he'll put the gloves down in the middle of the cage and walk away.
Oh, that would be interesting considering that he is fighting in his hometown of Miami. That would be kind of a sad way to go out.
But it wouldn't be a surprising thing, Stan. I
No,
mean, Masvidal, he had his little 2019, and ever since then, and
true.
I don't see Masvidal winning this one.
I don't
Gilbert
see him.
Burns is just
I don't
he's
see
just a
him
better
winning
overall
either.
fighter.
I think so too. I think Gilbert Burns is going to win by submission in the second round.
I don't know if I'd say a submission, but it's definitely going to be a finish. I agree with you that it's going to be a finish. It's either going to be a TKO or a submission. I
Yeah,
don't
and
see a straight knockout. I don't see a straight knockout, but it's going to get to the point where either Masvidal is going to have to tap or the referee is going to have to save him from his toughness.
Burns is going to have to slip up and make one mistake for Masvidal to have a chance.
Yeah, Burns is going to have to like drop his guard at some point for Masvidal to land a power shot that could change the fight, but I don't see that happening.
No, I
Um,
don't see that either.
And considering his UFC countdown statement, Zan, what do you see as most likely? We have had the tease, Zan, that, we joked that if Masvidal lost this fight and McGregor lost to Chandler, it'll be in the spirit of boxing 3 years or so too late. But would the UFC book McGregor versus Masvidal? Or, Zan, do you see it more likely, considering his UFC countdown statement, that he retires in Miami?
No, I'm going to say that if the money's right for McGregor and Masvidal, and they both lose like we think they're going to, I think they could do the fight if the money is there.
But could you see? Okay, but if
But
that's the case,
if you're asking what's more likely, it's more likely that he retires.
I agree. It's more likely that he retires. But Zan, but I guess even if the McGregor Masvidal fight goes through, if that fight does happen, that would have to be Masvidal's retirement fight anyway. Then,
Right, more than likely, regardless of if the BMF is on the line or not. Yeah, I would agree with that.
like, this is either the last fight or the second to last fight in his career, depending on what happens with the McGregor fight.
Right, and then if he wins if he somehow beats Gilbert Burns, I think he's back in contention for a title shot again.
That's true. So this is an all or nothing fight. Zan, Masvidal is in a more of an all. Masvidal is in more of a winner go home situation than Adesanya is.
Oh, I think so too. I think so too. But would you agree with me that if Gilbert Burns wins, that okay? How about this? If Gilbert Burns wins, what if you do him? What if he waits? What if? Oh, I have an idea. Although the UFC may be doing something a little different. What if you did Gilbert Burns versus the winner of Shavkat Rakhmonov and Bilal Muhammad if Gilbert Burns beats George Masvidal?
Oh, that's good. I really like that fight. And Zan, you take the Bilal Shavkat winner versus Gilbert Burns. You essentially make that a number one contenders fight. Getting the winner of
100%. Unless Covington's claim that Edwards is going to get stripped is true, then yeah, I would agree with your path, if you will, to a future title fight for Gilbert Burns.
Well, if Leon gets stripped and they do Colby versus, say, because if Leon gets stripped, then you would have to do Colby versus Gilbert Burns if Burns wins this fight, or you'd have to do Colby versus the winner of Bilal versus Shavkat, and then have Burns fight the winner of that fight.
Agreed. And then what do you do if you're Kamaru Usman, though? Where does Usman fit into all of this?
Zan, as I said last week, I'm trying to do I had to do it the other way because it's the mirror. Clock, waiting game. That's all you have to do with it.
Okay, one final question before we get off this fight. We're both picking Gilbert Burns, obviously. What is more appealing for the welterweight division? Is it Leon Edwards getting stripped and Colby Covington getting thrust into a title fight? Or is it Gilbert Burns winning, fighting the winner of Shavkat versus Bilal Muhammad, and then getting a title shot, assuming he wins that fight also?
The latter.
Okay.
The latter. Well, Zan, let me actually point out one more point because we talked about Adesanya, we talked about Usman, and I mentioned Adesanya going to welterweight. And I've said it before that these two will not fight each other because they're good friends. What if Adesanya loses this fight to Alex Pereira, and they look at each other and say, you know what? Not only does Adesanya go down weight, what if we switch places? Usman moved up to middleweight, and
That would be
Adesanya moved.
that would be very interesting. Very, very interesting.
I could see it. I could see it as a possibility, and you could put some new blood essentially into the divisions
Well said. Into both divisions, but more so 170 compared to 185.
for sure. Some other not undercard because it's still a main card, but pre-title fight, pre-main event fights to look at. Interestingly, Rob Font versus Adrian Yanez. This could be Adrian. I know we've talked about Adrian Yanez and like the run that he's been on in the UFC, and technically he's already had a coming out party, but this is going to bring him to another level, I think.
Yeah, and I actually think this is a must win for Rob Font. What do you think?
I could kind of see it. Zan Font, has had a good run. He's had some key wins over the last couple of years, but you know what this is essentially going to make Font, Zan? The magical G word. Gatekeeper.
Gatekeeper. And
And
that's a tough division anyway when you really think about it. So
But I do see Adrian Yanez getting the win. I think, Zan, this is a fight of the night, potentially. I could see this one going to a decision, but I see this one for Yanez.
yeah, I got Giannis by unanimous decision. It should be a good fight though. For sure. And as you know, Rob Font always brings it, so there's no way he won't bring it on Saturday. That's for sure.
Oh, for sure. I don't think he's going to damage himself with a loss. I just think it's going to be really, really tough on him.
I would agree. Well said.
And now, Zen, following that, well, technically before that, but following that in our preview, Zen, we've got the mouth of Riverside, California. Or if we're doing this fighting out of town, the mouth of Fort Worth, Texas. It's Kevin Holland taking on Santiago Ponzinibbio. The mouth is back.
The people's main event. You and I both know that this fight will not need the judges at all.
But who is going to be the one who gets stopped here? Is it going to be the mouth or is it going to be Santiago?
I actually think Ponzinibbio finishes Kevin Holland. What do you think?
I second that. Yes. I say second round finish for Santiago Ponzinibbio.
And Kevin Holland will be complaining about it many, many months after the loss too.
I was going to question you, Sam. How much do you think we're going to hear Kevin Holland talking to him during the fight?
Oh, he's going to talk the entire fight. He's not going to stop talking. There's no way.
Maybe we should get one of those lavalier mics or something, attached it to his fight shorts, so that way we can get running commentary.
That would be insane. I'm surprised the UFC production crew has not come up with that idea. Maybe they have. Maybe it's not allowed per the commission, but that would be hilarious.
Imagine hearing him as he gets knocked out.
That would be so crazy.
Also, Zan, to open the pay-per-view card, he's back. The 18-year-old phenom, Raul Rosas Jr. is going to be competing against Christian Rodriguez.
Yeah, so I have a question for you about this. There's been a lot of Twitter complaining about Raul Rosas Jr. Just being in this position. Do you think, given his age and just how much hype is behind him, do you think he should be opening a pay-per-view? Like, do you think that, like, with his star power and with what the UFC is trying to do, to build, the Mexico PI and all that, do you think this is simply a business move, or do you actually agree that this is what should be done to push Rosas Jr. and his potential, in your opinion?
That's tough. Because, Zan, we have seen him. I would normally say ESPN prelim headliner, but we've seen him in that role before, and we see him succeed. Am I surprised, though, Zan, regardless of what I think, am I surprised the UFC is doing this? No. Of course they are. I think Zan. I'm just of the people's opinion of this fight is going to be on the pay-per-view card, but Chris Curtis versus Kelvin Gastelum is going to be a prelim. Like I think Zan.
But
Honestly,
hey, the ESPN prelims are going to go through the roof with that main event, which should entice more people to buy the pay per view, though.
okay, fair enough from that business end. I just think Zan that Curtis versus Gastelum is worth more of a main card than not so
No,
much. I mean,
no, no,
not so
I
much this. I
agree.
mean, this
Yeah,
Holland versus Holland versus Ponzinibbio should be the headliner for the ESPN Plus. I mean ESPN prelim.
that's fair too.
That being the case, I understand what the UFC is doing. They're gonna take a young phenom. They're gonna put him against uh they're gonna put him against other talent. This is gonna be to try and do the build up. And seeing successful runs kind of strategies. And take for instance, wait, did I cut out?
No, you didn't. You're good. Keep going.
Okay. Take for instance, then what happened with AJ McKee in Bellator. Bellator took him on his professional MMA debut, and they slowly built him up over the course of 4 to 5 years, to the point by the time he went to the Grand Prix, he defeated Pitbull in the Grand Prix, and that was one of the greatest moments in Bellator history. I think the UFC is trying to do something with Raul Rosas Jr., where they can slowly build him up over time. Or, I mean, what am I kidding? It's the UFC. They'll probably try and rocket him as quick as they can. That being said, Christian Rodriguez 8-1. When was the last time he fought? He actually fought at the UFC card on October 29th, defeating Joshua Weems first round submission. I think Zan, they're going to just try and have him fight some fellow young guys who have similar records or veteran talent who are more experienced to kind of build him up to the point where they want to get him. So, am I surprised that they're putting him as the opener for a pay per view? Probably not. Not surprised.
I'm pretty excited for it, just because I watched Rosas Jr.'s debut. I know you did too. So this is going to be okay under the bright lights. A lot of people watching. Let's see how he does. It should be pretty interesting. Kind of similar to when
Yeah,
Sean O'Malley opened the UFC 264 pay per view with Chris Moutinho. Not a lot of people knew what to expect, and of course O'Malley went out and did his thing. I'm not comparing O'Malley to Raul
I was
Rosas
just
Jr.
saying, I think
Hang
Chris
on, hang on.
Montillo got the bigger rub in that fight.
I think so. I think so too. And either way, Chris Moutinho is as tough as they come. So credit him for taking that fight when he did. But still, I mean, you have a similar situation. You get a guy who's a big star against, or a guy with the potential to be a big star in Rosas Jr. against the guy in Rodriguez that really not a lot of people know a lot about. But if this fight's competitive, people are going to definitely know who he is afterwards. So we'll see how that goes. Overall, though, I don't like to grade a card before the card starts, but this is a B plus, A minus level UFC pay per view. This is a really solid card. It's a really
Yeah,
good card.
I'm gonna say B plus in terms of the pre pay per view hype. Do you have a prediction for Rosas versus Rodriguez? Do you think
I'm
Rosas gets?
I'm going to say Rosas Jr. has another first round win. What do you think?
Late first, early second.
Okay. Yeah, I just think his grappling is going to be too much for Rodriguez.
Of course, we do have some prelim fights we gotta talk about. Obviously, the big one, as we mentioned, Chris Curtis getting Kelvin Gastelum in the headliner. I think Zan. I think the run of Chris Curtis is going to continue.
Wow, you think he's going to beat Kelvin Gastelum?
I think he beats Kelvin Gastelum.
Wow. Well, hey, if he beats Kelvin Gastelum, you're going to start seeing Chris Curtis on pay-per-view main cards. That's for damn sure. There's no doubt about that.
Man, I think Kelvin Gastelum is in the same class of Marlon Moraes. Not so much I can say washed up, but I mean 5 losses in his last 6. He's not on a good run right now.
Yeah, he's not been the same fighter for the last 4 years. Let's just say that he has not been. That Adesanya fight at UFC 236 really changed him, in my opinion. It took something out of him that he hasn't been able to get back ever since.
And I don't think Zain. I mean, I get it that Chris Curtis had retired already, and this is a bit of a comeback for him. But the comeback for him has been highly successful, and I don't think Kelvin Gastelum is going to get that it factor back against Chris Curtis.
Yeah, I'm picking Curtis by decision.
You're going to call me crazy. I think Curtis knocks Kelvin Gastelum out.
Wow! Oh, wow. Okay, that's your boldest prediction of 2023 so far.
That's my bold prediction. Chris Curtis knocks out Kelvin Gastelum.
Wow. Well, if that happens, he's going to get a performance bonus. So,
I think he's going to be motivated by the fact that Raul Rosas Jr. is on a pay-per-view card and he's not. I think he's going to make a statement.
Very interesting. Well, that's going to be a crazy headliner, and truly, this card is good. That's the only other fight on the undercard that really intrigues me. Are there any others that you're interested in talking about, or do you think we've exhausted this card as much as we can?
Well, I mean, Zain, I would have said Michael Chiesa versus Li Jinglang, but unfortunately, Jinglang over the last few hours before we started recording announced that due to injury, he is going to be out for that fight. And I don't think their UFC is going to get a replacement for Chiesa on such short notice.
Yeah, that was my next question. Are they thinking of a replacement for Chiesa? But it looks like that's not going to happen. Okay.
So, which would mean the second biggest prelim fight, Zain, would be Michelle Waterson against Luana Pinheiro, which 10 versus 15 at strawweight, fine, but definitely not the firefight that Chiesa versus Lee could have been.
I would predict. I think that Waterson's going to win. That would be my prediction on that.
Zain, hold on a second. Hold on a minute. No, we're not done talking about the prelims. We got to talk about the ESPN Plus UFC Fight Pass headliner prelim. Zain, it's time once again for us to be Joe Piper.
Let's go.
Joe Piper against Gerald Meerschaert is going to be the ESPN Plus UFC Fight Pass early prelim headliner.
You can't. It's a can't miss because we said it. You can't miss it.
So I'm gonna say Joe Piper gets it done against Meerschaert. Second round.
You actually think Joe Piper has a chance?
Yes.
He's fighting someone with over 50 fights. You literally think he has a chance against Gerald Meerschaert,
yes.
who's been around forever.
Be Joe Piper.
Oh my goodness. Let's see. So yeah, Joe Piper's last fight in the UFC was his win against Alan Amadovsky in September of 2022. So it's his first fight back
from the infamous Be Joe Piper rant by Dana.
That's exactly right, and it was during the worst Dana White Contender Series episode in the history of the show too. And I can say that with confidence because I sat through the entire thing and I have massive regrets about that. So, let's see. Hang on. And then if you look at Gerald Meerschaert, who's been in the UFC for a long time, he's 10-7 in the UFC, and he's coming off of a guillotine win against Bruno Silva in August of 22. So they're both coming off wins. So,
yeah, and I mean, Gerald Meerschaert has wins, and his losses aren't exactly that bad. Krzysztof Jotko is a little questionable, but Hamza Chimaev.
He lost to Hamza Chimaev before anybody really knew who Hamza Chimaev was. That was Chimaev's big coming out party when he knocked out Meerschaert.
Ian Heinisch, Kevin Holland, which is a split decision, Jack Hermanson, Eric Anders, Thiago Santos. So,
Thiago Thiago Santos now is hilarious given where he is in his career now.
Yeah. So, but you know what, Zan, I'm in screw it mode right now. So I went screw it. I was going with Chris Curtis knocking out Kelvin Gastelum. I say screw it. Joe Piper's beating Gerald Meerschaert.
You think he's going to do it in the first round? Because I do.
Two. I say early
Okay.
second. I think Meerschaert is tough enough to get past the first.
Interesting. So yeah, just a reminder to beat Joe Piper, but especially on Saturday because he has a fight this weekend. Let's go!
All right, best bets. I think we both agreed for the main event over 3.5 rounds.
Yeah, I like Adesanya Pereira over 3.5. Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal to end inside the distance, and I like Joe Piper money line against Gerald Meerschaert. Those are my 3 best bets.
I'm going to go, as I said before, over 3.5 rounds for Adesanya versus Pereira, the main event. I'm going to agree with you with the Joe Piper. You said Joe Piper money line?
Yeah.
Okay, Joe Piper money line, and then I'm going to go Chris Curtis knocks out Kelvin Gastelum.
Well, I have to ask you. Tom. Are you interested for your best bets in parlaying them together?
Ooh. Yes, yes, I would do that as a parlay.
Very interesting. Oh well, yeah. I mean that's another UFC event to look forward to that's coming up, and not to look too far ahead. We won't talk about this more until next week, but the Kansas City card, which I am sadly not going to be able to attend,
It's going to be fun, though.
even though it's 6 hours away, it will be fun. That's for sure. But of course, we have one
We're
more
not
fight.
done, by the way.
We have one more fight to briefly talk about. I know. We got one more fight to briefly talk about. Larissa Pacheco, who's coming off that massive upset against Kayla Harrison, is taking on Strikeforce and Bellator veteran Julia Budd. Tom, do you have any sort of thoughts on this fight whatsoever?
Pacheco by decision. That's my call.
I would agree. The rest of the card maybe or maybe is not worth watching, so do so at your own discretion.
I mean, it's heavyweight, so you're guaranteed to see some pretty good knockouts, I think. Unless this is one of those cards where a lot of heavyweight fights direct to the decision, in which case I don't think PFL can afford that after the first card of the season.
No, I don't think so either. That'll be on ESPN2 on Friday night for those of you who are curious. Obviously, the last one last week was on ESPN. So, to wrap up, that was the pretty much the ever developing week in combat sports. As Tom alluded to, he and Nick Morganson are going to cover more of the Endeavor news with the WWE and the UFC as the week goes on a little further. But yeah, we have some exciting shows coming up the next several weeks with a lot of big fights. So stay tuned for all of that. Again, before we get out of here, I'm Sam Bando. You can find my work at bjpen.com. I hit a milestone over the weekend with eclipsing over 4,000 Twitter followers. So if you have not followed me on Twitter yet, you can do so at SamBando99. You can also follow the show at MMA Outsiders ETV. You can follow the Empty the Bench podcast network across all social media platforms at ETV Network. As Tom alluded to earlier in the show, as his name pops up on the screen, he is a contributor for Fansided MMA. You can check out his work there and follow him on Twitter at Thomas J. Albano and at Tom Talk Sports 9. But of course, as we were saying at the very beginning of the show, as well as video form, you will also be able to hear this podcast in audio form at a later date. All the details on that are still being worked out. But again, thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the MMA Outsiders. This has been episode number 32. We're 8 episodes away from another milestone at episode 40. So thank you for following along with us, and thank you for enjoying our banter, even though sometimes we do get a little bit off topic of sports. But overall, this was a successful episode. Tom, do you have any final thoughts?
Not really. Just I'm still trying to figure out, still trying to wrap my mind around the fact that Endeavor now owns both the biggest wrestling company and the biggest MMA company in the world.
pretty wild stuff, if I do say so myself. That'll be a developing story in the weeks and months to come. My final thoughts are that I'm very excited for UFC 287. I've been excited for this card ever since it was announced about a month or so ago during Dana White's Quarter 1 announcement. And speaking of Quarter 2 announcements, Dana White said at some point this week we're going to get more clarity on who is fighting during Q2, which means we'll probably know the main events for UFC 289, 290, 291, and probably 292 in the near future, which also means that we are very, very close to the all but coveted UFC 300, which where I hope Jim Miller does compete on that card, considering that he did compete on UFC 100 and UFC 200.
But before we get there, Zan, that means we're going to be one step closer to the coveted International Fight Week in July.
That is very true, and that'll be a full week ordeal with UFC X that'll take place the entire week, culminating with UFC 290 on July 8th, and of course the UFC Hall of Fame ceremony on July 6th, which, as we alluded to last week, has a loaded class. So stay tuned for all of that, and who knows, you might see me in Vegas. I'm playing during that week. I'd like to go to another UFC in Vegas, so I'm looking at that one as a potential. I would go as a fan. I would not go as a media member. That would be a dream to go to one of those as a member of the media, but that is still being worked on, and that is still in the cards. But for anyone watching who's never been to a UFC event in Las Vegas, it is definitely an experience that I certainly will never forget. And if any of you happen to go to Vegas in the near future, you guys won't forget it as well. So that's pretty much all we have. There's going to be a lot of news and notes to break over the next several weeks, so keep it locked in with the MMA Outsiders as we'll do our best to cover anything and everything that is the world of combat sports.
And one last thing, just beat Joe Piper.
Just be
watch Joe Piper.
Be Joe Piper. Watch Joe Piper fight Gerald Meerschaert, and be really excited when Joe Piper, hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, beats Gerald Meerschaert too. So there's that.
All right. For Zan, I'm Tom. We'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Have a great week and enjoy the fights.